G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and I thought for today we'd do a bit of a change of pace. See, I've started doing the second half of the Getting Started in Horus Heresy series, but I get a lot of questions from people in the comments sections of those videos, talking about things like, hey, you know, I want to collect such and such legion, but is this what they do? And whilst you can pigeonhole a legion into a certain playstyle on the tabletop, I think the more important thing is to talk about how the legion performs in their background, and then how that background actually plays out on the table is a slightly separate entity to it. So what I've done here is put down sort of 4 key attributes I associate with these different legions. Obviously opinions may vary between people, but this is how I personally see it, and I want to basically break down what they mean to me. So we'll start from left to right, top to bottom. We'll go with the Dark Angels first, so top left. Their playstyle on the table is very true to their tactics, which is they're a very balanced legion. They are always thinking of the big strategic picture. They're excellent at the tactical level, and they utilize essentially what we're going to say knights here. Their hierarchy are all recruited from Caliban or being indoctrinated into those sort of Calibanite circles within the legion. Master duelists, a lot of emphasis on knightly honor, certain conduct. They have rituals, as it were, and inner circles and societies. That's what we mean when we say knights here. So the Dark Angels are the template or legion that deviates the least from the Emperor himself. So the Lion is basically the Primarch that is closest in personality and attributes to the Emperor, ignoring the fact that, okay, certain Primarchs like Magnus, for example, may exemplify one aspect, the psychic powers and maybe the ego of the Emperor. Or maybe Horus, the Emperor's charisma, or Alfarius, the Emperor's cunning, maybe one could say. Well, the Lion is just a balance of all of the facets of his personality. And the Legion is very much moulded in line with that. Because they were the first Legionaries Astartes created, they didn't need to be specialised, they just needed to be the basic template that everyone else worked off. And they were out there kicking ass and taking names long before the other legions came into being. Moving on from there, the third legion, the Emperor's Children, glorious purple people eaters, up in the top left there, second one in. So the Emperor's Children are perfectionists. That's why it's the number one trait I listed down there. Every job that they do, they think they can do it better than the other people can. And because of this, it's led to a little bit of ego, we'll say. Now, the interesting thing about them is they're a very tactical legion. They are very good at that, we're on the ground, we have to deal with this situation, let's get on with it type of thing. They're really good at that tactical approach because they're a multi-role legion. Every legionnaire is as good with the bolt gun as they are with the las cannon. That's the way they see it. Everyone is a perfectionist and they're good at everything equally. That's not necessarily true, but that's how they see it, and they train towards that goal. And of course, duelists is in there because their characters especially have such high egos and take offense to things. They take it very personally, and often throughout the Heresy are shown to be engaging in a lot of personal honor fights. Some, like Lucius, take it to extremes. This, of course, is not true for everyone within the Legion. There are other subcategories you could apply, like Noise Marines, for example, but we're talking overall Legion 100-foot view. Next one along, we have the Iron Warriors, another traitor Legion. They are definitely siege specialists. They are strategists, they're thinking of the big picture, but they're not great tacticians, and that's going to annoy some Iron Warriors players, but they're not, because their tactics usually boil down to some form of heavy artillery and attritional warfare, assaulting the enemy position and losing many lives in the process. Yes, it does win battles, but as I said, they're strategists, they're not tacticians. They look at the campaign and go, hey, we can take that wall just by throwing bodies at it. Oh yeah, it's going to cost 100 bodies. How many have we got? 101? Cool, we're going to have leftovers. Let's do it. They're that kind of level of butchery. They are like people who are playing a video game, and it doesn't matter how they win as long as they win the video game, and they will throw bodies against the wall to accomplish this. Moving on from the Iron Warriors, we get to the White Scars. Now, the White Scars are a rapid assault force. Love their jet bikes. They're all about maneuver, and it's sort of represented in the rules by extra movement. Not the best representation on the tabletop, but it works. Now, hit and run tactics. The White Scars also utilize a distributed HQ or a distributed command, and this is worth really noting because all of those things, maneuver, hit and run, distributed HQ, all tie into another. The White Scars are willing to let their subordinates take their own initiative. Many legions, like the Iron Warriors, are not. So when you combine taking your own initiative with rapid assaults, the ability to maneuver around the battlefield, hitting the enemy and withdrawing, it makes the White Scars very, very dangerous in situations where they're able to employ that. The problem with the Siege of Terror for the White Scars being defenders was they always wanted to take the offensive. And of course that meant real problems for them when they're trying to be siege specialists and hold a wall, when their whole approach is, hey, we don't hold walls, we go out, we kill the enemy before they attack the wall. Or we wait for them to attack the wall, maybe they're attacking a fellow loyalist like the Imperial Fists. Well, the White Scars will circle around behind the enemy while they're doing that and pincer them. That's the kind of tactics they love. Versus the next legion along, the Space Wolves. Now, the Space Wolves also have a distributed HQ, and they use their own initiative, but their initiative is not being used to come up with complex and interesting ways to deal with an issue. They're more of a distributed HQ in that each soldier is for himself or for his immediate packmates. They favour close assault, shock assault. They see themselves as executioners. They see themselves as the legion who is designed to kill other legions. And I think it's more of a self-assigned role rather than actually being the best at it because, well, events in the Heresy prove they are not. They failed despite having the jump on the Thousand Suns, and with the help of both the Sisters of Silence and the Legio Custodes, and their entire Legion strength, still failed to take out the Thousand Suns, who were caught off guard on the defensive. So maybe a bit overblown in that regard. Moving on to the Imperial Fists. Now, the Imperial Fists are fortification as opposed to siege specialists. So the Iron Warriors will take down the castle, the Imperial Fists will build the castle, as it were. And there is a huge amount of each legion being able to do what the other one does. The Iron Warriors are also capable of building a castle. The Imperial Fists are also capable of taking one down. But they are slightly better at fortifying and wrecking, respectively. So the Imperial Fists also love firepower. They have a lot of assault cannons, they love their armor, they have a massive space fleet, including the Phalanx, the largest and most imposing of Imperial warships, a sort of relic war moon almost, a gigantic space station. But they are very rigid in their chain of command. They're not what you would call adaptable as a legion. They are like their Primarch, they're very set in stone in their ways, and yes, they are what they are, the Imperial Fists. Moving on from there, we get to a Traitor Legion now, the Night Lords. Now, the Night Lords, Terror Tactics, it's definitely their number one. They will essentially pull the whole Neo-Assyrian thing of torturing, mutilating their enemies and making a show of it to warn the next guy, or to, hopefully, if they do it most extremely, it will persuade the enemy to not even take up arms in the first place and just surrender to them without even having to have a fight. But if the fight does have to occur, they are very much a shock assault force, not to be confused with close assault. So close assault means favours close combat. Shock assault means you get in there rapidly and hit so hard the enemy doesn't know what hit them, and then they pull out. They also use infiltration tactics. They like the night, and the idea of that Batman, that demon in the dark, jumping out at you in the night, then doing the shock assault, and then the hit and run, getting back out of there before you have a way to respond to them, and it's terrifying. And that is their tactics in a nutshell. The Blood Angels now. The Blood Angels are close assault as well, and shock assault. So very similar to the Space Wolves, but where the Space Wolves see themselves as distributed HQ, just packs of roving hunters on the battlefield, the Blood Angels are very balanced. They're willing to use other weapons and arms to a greater extent than the Space Wolves, and very much are strict and disciplined and listen to their commanders, hence a rigid command structure. Overall, they're sort of the paragons of the Imperium because people actually like the Blood Angels versus, say, the Ultramarines, who have many similar attributes, but are surprisingly unlikable. More likable in the Heresy, though, than in 40k. Next along, we have the Iron Hands, the last one in the top row. They love armor assaults, whether that armor is vehicles or whether that armor is Terminators. They just love it. Big dependence on them. They love firepower. They have a very rigid command structure and very rigid doctrines. They don't deviate much from, as we're shown in the stories, from this approach to how they conduct their warfare, which is get in, hit hard, knock the enemy so hard at the start of an assault that they can't resist you any further, essentially, and then consider the job done. Mop up. Overall, though, actually pretty fun Legion to play on the tabletop. Very resilient Legion on the tabletop. I could almost put Endurance into there, but the fact is they are very rigid in command. Ferrus Manus was, we'll say, a very volatile Primarch, as were a lot of the commanders. Took that taciturn personality from him and did not have this thing known as charisma at all. But they got in there and they just did the job. Moving on from there, we're now into the bottom row. Starting on the left, the World Eaters. Shock Assault, Close Combat, and I put Shock Assault first because they will hit you hard with, they will use tanks, they will use anything at their disposal, and of course infantry. But Close Assault it's definitely a thing, but assault in general and hitting you hard is the first thing they will do. Attritional warfare, of course, when your favourite tactic is running at people who are in fortified defensive positions full of machine guns, and your idea of a good attack is to run at them with an axe, you're going to take a lot of casualties, and that is the World Eaters. And I say Berserkers in there. Now, Berserkers is not referring to Khorne Berserkers, it's referring to the fact that they essentially lose their marbles in combat because of the butcher's nails that are hammered into their heads. This means that when they're actually involved in combat, they stop thinking rationally about how to tackle a situation. They become essentially big idiots who think aggression is the only way out of any problem, and, well, a certain argument can be made that for them it is, but they're shown to be in certain situations, say, tackling an Ultramarines shield wall. So there's a bunch of Ultramarines, and they've got interlocked boarding shields defending them, and these guys are just literally throwing themselves against the shields and being cut down. Now, a sensible Legion would pull their troops back and then just start hitting the Ultramarines with artillery. Use your firepower to break them up, because Demolisher shells are more powerful than siege shields. Well, the World Eaters' approach to this was actually just throw more bodies at them, keep going, and eventually we'll get the Ultramarines, and yeah, it worked. But it is not a smart tactic. The Ultramarines now. Balanced tacticians, strategists, and adaptable. This is all true. This is before the time of the Codex. The Ultramarines see a situation, they think of the most practical way to deal with it, and they deal with it. And they're very good at it. The problem is, though, it's not a very likable approach for many of the other legions around them, because sometimes, especially in the minds of other legions, like, say, the White Scars or the Raven Guard, it's just, look, just get in there, you'll be fine, we'll deal with problems as they arise, don't overthink the situation. The Ultramarines are like the textbook general that my battle plan is going to take exactly 30 minutes and will have overwhelmed the enemy. Oh no, it took 31 minutes, this is a disastrous failure. No, it was not, you still won the fight. But they're very rigid in that regard, versus other legions which will be like, look, you don't need to overthink every situation, just get in there, you're in power armor, you'll probably kill the bad guys. You know, let's adapt, let's be master tacticians when the situation calls for it. And that's where a force like the Dark Angels or the Blood Angels perform better. Next along we have the Death Guard. Now the Death Guard are definitely chemical warfare specialists. They are well employed in those hostile environments where other legions would definitely suffer more. It's not that the other legions are incapable of fighting in chemical war zones, for example. That's why power armor exists, and some legions, like the Salamanders, are also very good at dealing with chemical weapons. But the Death Guard focus on that type of warfare and fighting in those situations, and that's what makes them better at it. They're also fans of shock assault. They will throw a bunch of phosphex and chemical weapons into your trench and then jump into the trench as they're going off and hit you while you're still trying to put your gas mask on. They love siege tactics, and they love attrition warfare. They are very similar to the Iron Warriors in many regards. Then we get to the Thousand Sons, and by far the most powerful of legions, and people will go, oh, well, that's not true, there's not many of them. We have it in multiple stories just how powerful a force multiplier a Thousand Sons force is, which is where interlinked, balanced, and HQ dependent all come into play. So Thousand Sons essentially work with multiple different cults, and these cults are focused on essentially your classic psychic disciplines like biomancy, pyromancy, telekinesis, divination, etc., etc. And when they're actually performing the battlefield, squads are made up of members of multiple different cults. They're not just a squad of all diviners, all pyromancers, for example. What will happen is the Thousand Sons who can see into the future, the diviners, will turn around and say, the enemy is around the corner. Then the telekinesis guys will go, cool, let's make up a shield of telekinesis to stop their enemy's bullets. Then they'll jump around the corner. The pyromancers will hit the enemy with fire magic. And if any rounds get through, then the Thousand Sons biomancers will help heal the wounded, or they'll make their bodies, say their skin turn to stone or something to help make them more bulletproof. And the telepathy masters might turn around and either fortify the Thousand Sons' own will, or maybe project images into the enemy's mind. There's even more Thousand Sons than there really are there. And so they combine all of these things together in order to overwhelm their enemies. So they're not just taking them on with bolt guns. And it's very hard to translate this to the tabletop, always has been. And all of these Thousand Sons are not speaking these words to each other. They're communicating because all of them are psychically connected to one another at all times and to their Primarch, who is able to disconnect himself from everyone else, but is always able to hear their thoughts. And so all of these Thousand Sons are working together in unwritten harmony, which is why they almost seem robotic to other legions. But they're talking, it's all mental. And they are very interlinked. They feel the pain and anguish of their brothers dying, and it terrifies them when one of them descends into Chaos Spawn from overdrawing on his psychic powers, for example. And they're very HQ dependent. They need their HQs there in order to sort of sturdy that psychic interlinking and to really focus them and keep them on track rather than letting them all go off in their own ways. And it's a very interesting approach to warfare. We know from, for example, one story, Magnus tearing apart a pair of psychic Eldar Phantom Titans, like psychically just ripped these Titans apart, or another time he blew himself up, essentially, like a balloon, to the size of an Orc Gargant and punched a couple of Gargants to death, because those are some of his psychic powers. Silly, yes, but fun, yes. Or another time where the Thousand Sons sent, I think it was 20 Space Marines down to a planet and killed an entire Night House with 20 Space Marines. Like, huge force multipliers. And I've seen, tier lists people have done of who's the most powerful legion. They'll do something like put, the Ultramarines, there's 280,000 of them. Biggest legion, most powerful. One-on-one, the Ultramarines are losing to the Thousand Sons 10 out of 10 times if it's two legions with all of their strength going in an all-out battle on a battlefield, because the force multiplication effect of psychic powers is so great. Anyway, that was a lot on the Thousand Sons. Let's move on from there to the Sons of Horus. Now, Sons of Horus, they are kind of similar tactics to the Night Lords, but less of a terror approach and more combining some of those World Eater traits of just hitting you like a freight train. Rapid assault, Catulan Reavers, for example, jump infantry, lots of chain swords, chain axes, assault tactics, but also they're adaptable. They're smart enough to know when to call in Terminators or to pull back and use artillery. They have a very balanced and adaptable approach. They don't lose their heads in battle like other legions do, and that's why they're sort of the arch traitors, as it were. Going on from there, you get to the Wordbearers. Now, the Wordbearers, they are a balanced force. They're very similar to the Ultramarines. They are HQ dependent, however. They want their sort of psychic warrior leaders to inform what they do as a legion. And unfortunately, if they have a HQ that sort of goes off the rails and has his own mission that he wants to go on, he will take a chunk of the legion with him to do it, because they're not thinking necessarily for themselves. And this does cause problems to the Wordbearers throughout the Heresy. They are strategists, they are thinking of the big picture, and they are adaptable. So they are very much traitor Ultramarines in a way. Next, we get to the Salamanders. Now, the Salamanders' key attributes, first of all, endurance. So they will pick themselves up and dust themselves off no matter how hard you put the guys down. An admirable quality. They are very balanced. They love everything that they do, essentially, whether it's close combat and thunderhammers and storm shields, or whether it's using big armored formations. They'll do everything. They definitely have a preference towards flame weapons, fire weapons, melter weapons, high-tech conversion beamers, plasma weapons, all that sort of stuff, because they're master artificers. They build these amazing weapons and they use them in combat. Of course, over time, everything is skewed very heavily towards just flamer weapons, and the tabletop especially. But throughout their history, the Legion has used multiple different types of weapons in their warfighting. And they're the defenders. And I say defenders not because they sit there on a wall and hold it like the Imperial Fists. No, they're defenders of humanity. They are one of the only legions, if not the only legion, that will sacrifice themselves for the good of a common human. And that's their most admirable quality. There are stories, for example, from 40k, like Armageddon, where Marines Malevolent, for example, shelled a refugee camp because there were orcs in the refugee camp, and they said, well, screw the civilian casualties, I need to kill the orcs. And the chapter master of the Salamanders, Tushan, just walked up and knocked out cold the leader of the Marines Malevolent for the act. They look out for the little guy. And they were known as sort of the defenders of humanity. The Blood Angels hailed them for... so Dante himself in 40k hailed Tushan as a hero of the Imperium. So it means very high praise for one chapter in 40k to praise another. It was the same in the Horus Heresy. If your world was coming under attack from a Xenos race, if the Night Lords were defending you, they would use you as bait to pull out the Xenos race, for example. Same with the Alpha Legion. You were just a number to them. But the Salamanders would literally put their Marines between you and the Xenos and sell all of their lives to save yours. Going on from there, you get to the Raven Guard. Now, the Raven Guard, very, very similar to the Alpha Legion. Distributed HQ. That means you can't just kill the commander and think you've won the battle, because the next guy in command, he'll just pick up where the other guy left off, and they will keep fighting you. And they will think, and they will keep reacting and moving. They will pull back, hit you, withdraw into the shadows, come back, hit you again from a different direction, and keep doing that until they wear you down. They are brilliant at it. The Raven Guard were the only legion to sort of survive on Istvan after the Drop Site Massacre, because when the other legions, the Salamanders and the Iron Warriors, started getting just shredded by... the Iron Hands started getting shredded by the enemy, the Raven Guard saw the writing on the wall and helped out the fellow legions, but then they said, okay, we need to break out of here. And they did it. They broke out. They broke past the traitor lines into the canyons beyond, so they're no longer encircled. And then for 90-odd days, I think it was 97 days, did hit-and-run tactics against traitor columns. They would see 10 traitors sitting there, having a meal around a campfire, come up, slit all their throats, take their ammunition and armor so they could keep fighting. And they did that on the run from multiple traitor legions for 3 months. That's the Raven Guard fighting style. They won't come down and attack a planet with a frontal assault like, say, the Iron Hands would, and amass all their tanks in a big line and then just drive towards cities. They don't do that. They would go in, snap the necks of all the enemy's leaders, knock out all the communications arrays, isolate the different elements of the enemy army, and then say, do you surrender yet? We can keep going. That's their style, and they were very, very good at it. Unfortunately, on the tabletop, they're very much focused on the shock assault tactics. The, hey, get some jump packs and assault everyone. Then we get to the Alpha Legion. Now, the Alpha Legion, like the Raven Guard, have distributed HQs, so you can't just kill the boss, quote-unquote, and think you've won the battle, because they will just keep going with the plan, the next guy will take charge. They are strategists. They are thinking of the big picture. What is our end goal here? They're not necessarily what I would call sort of good tacticians, okay? They are adaptable to a degree, but no more than anyone else really is shown to be. But they definitely have a hold over the entire situation and how an overall campaign is going to go. They love infiltration tactics. They'll do similar things to the Raven Guard. They'll come in, snap the necks of the commanders, blow up all the infrastructure. But they'll probably take it a step too far, where instead of doing it... let's say the Raven Guard were going to take out a city. They might say, this is the best way to do it, and just do it. The Alpha Legion would try and show off in how they did it. They would wait for an enemy to bring more and more troops in, and fortify even more heavily, and then do those tactics, just to prove the point that, look, we could still do it anyway. There's a bit of showmanship in there, a bit of showboating, and it is probably their big weakness, but they are very adaptable. So where the Raven Guard will hit, withdraw, hit again, the Alpha Legion will just come up with a new plan on the fly. And not to be confused with overall tactics of a campaign, but more just on a squad by squad level, what we're trying isn't working, let's try something else. So anyway, that's a brief rundown of the legions and their playstyles. On the tabletop though, people want to know what are the best. Dangerous things to say, but I won't say who's necessarily the best here, but I'll say what legions I think are really easy to play. So the Imperial Fists, the Iron Warriors, the Death Guard, Emperor's Children, Space Wolves, Night Lords. They're by far the top end of the legions. Most of the other legions sit roughly in the middle, and I would put the Raven Guard and the Salamanders as second last and last respectively. The ones that made it to the very top, like the Iron Warriors, Imperial Fists, Death Guard, are legions that are, and sort of Space Wolves, legions that have a very low skill cap. They are forces where you don't really need to think to play them well, because their rules are very forgiving. Whereas other legions have very situational rules that you have to work hard in order to get the payoff from their special rules. So, think for example, Salamanders. Okay, your legion rule basically is you need to get hit by a flamer weapon to have a slight buff against flamer weapons, versus Imperial Fist, who's like, hey, any bolter weapons, auto weapons in the game, whether it's auto cannons, whether it's heavy bolters, whatever, are all +1 to hit with at all times. One of those is always on, always working in your favor, versus the other one is like a very situational bonus. And because of that, it means that one legion is a lot more easy to play from a rules standpoint. Also, a lot of those legions, like the Imperial Fists or the Iron Warriors, have some really good legion war gear. Imperial Fists have Storm Shields that will get Tartarus Terminators to 3+ invulnerable saves. They also have the assault cannons throughout, so they've got this awesome war gear. The Iron Warriors, they have Graviton Mauls or Graviton Hammers. They've also got Shrapnel Bolts, so they've got some really good war gear that oftentimes is just straight up a better replacement than other weapons in the same category that it's competing with. And when you stack all of these things together, it makes them very easy to play. Others, like the Emperor's Children and the Night Lords, are really strong legions, but they require more thought, more tactics in how you apply them on the tabletop. You can't just throw them up the table like the Space Wolves and go, oh look, I can run and charge, and I just point me towards enemy and I have 1,000 bonuses. They don't work like that. But if you play them very smart, they hit so hard, they will win you games. So for example, the Night Lords, because they have terror, as in terror tactics, they cause fear. They have a lot of negative morale modifiers. So you can do what we call fear bombing, or at least I'm calling it today, that's what I'm going to call it, fear bombing the enemy, where you have so many Night Lords stacking so many abilities, you can drop enemy morale in an area of the battlefield, which makes them very easy to shoot off the table or make them run. And fear bombing the enemy is a very effective tactic, because if you can run them down, it solves the problem then and there, rather than having to kill them. The Emperor's Children, on the other hand, when they assault you, they hit you so fast that you've already lost half of your guys before you get to retaliate against them. So it doesn't matter if you're better at fighting, because you have less people to start that fight with, and that trend will continue turn on turn, only getting exponentially worse. And those legions that are in the middle and at the bottom is not to say they are weak. They are equally powerful, but the skill ceiling gets progressively higher. Take Raven Guard. The Raven Guard, if played really well, will absolutely smash face. But you're limited in the amount of builds you can try, and your tactics has to be very on point, because one mistake and you throw the whole game. Something similar could be said with the Salamanders, or for example, the Iron Hands. Iron Hands have this brilliant buffs that they give to units, especially their dreadnoughts, and if you have, say, an Iron Hands dreadnought specific army, it is going to be incredibly strong on the tabletop, because basically no weapons in the game on basic infantry are going to hurt them. But you have to ask yourself at the same time as you do this, is this A, the way that this force should be played, and B, is this going to be fun? Because fun in this game, especially in Heresy, is not all about how you feel in a game, it's about how the people you are playing feel in a game. And if your community is like, hey, no, bring all the dreadnoughts you want and cheese this and we're fine with it, cool, because your community is into that. But if you come along with that and it's a friendly match, people who are playing you might have a miserable time, and very quickly you're going to find nobody wants to play you. Do you want to be that person in the community? I would suggest no, but of course I can't speak for everyone. So anyway, that's my rundown and quick thoughts on all of these legions. Up to you what you do with them. This is just my take on it. Anyway, back with the outer circle. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you all on the next one.